12 doctors rushed into the glittering penthouse as the last sirens faded below, turning the marble living room into a war room of whispered orders and flashing monitors. Behind drawn curtains, the skyline blinked like an indifferent witness, while armed men paced in tailored suits demanding a miracle that money couldn't buy. The patient, feared, powerful, untouchable, was slipping away, and every specialist insisted they had seen worse. Yet minutes bled into hours, and the simplest questions went unasked. Why did the IV bag look wrong? Why did the medication label not match the chart? In the chaos, a quiet maid moved through the wreckage of overturned trays and bloodless linens, noticing what everyone else had ignored: a single switch set backward. A line connected to the wrong port. The mistake sat in plain sight, hiding behind confidence and panic. One small correction, and suddenly the room fell silent. The fluorescent lights of Johns Hopkins Hospital cast their sterile glow across the marble floors of the VIP wing, where silence held more weight than whispers. At 3:17 in the morning, the only sounds were the soft hum of ventilation systems and the distant ping of monitors keeping watch over Baltimore's most powerful patients. Ava D'Amico moved through these corridors like a shadow, her cleaning cart's wheels barely audible against the polished stone. The chemical scent of industrial disinfectant clung to her uniform, mixing with the faint smell of expensive cologne that lingered in the air from earlier visitors. She had learned to read these halls like a book. Every scent told a story, every sound carried meaning. In room 1247, Dominic Sorrentino lay unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped with mechanical precision. 12 of the hospital's finest specialists had examined him over the past week, each more baffled than the last. Charts lined the walls like battle plans, filled with test results that led nowhere and theories that crumbled under scrutiny. Ava paused at the threshold, her trained eye catching details that others missed: the yellow tinge beneath Dominic's fingernails, the way his hair lay thinner against the pillow than in the photos scattered across his bedside table, the slight inflammation around his gums that made his breathing shallow. She had seen this before. The memory hit her like ice water, her father's hands, yellowed and trembling, the doctors shaking their heads in confusion as he wasted away. Natural causes, they had written on the death certificate. Age and stress. But Ava had been a third-year medical student then. Before everything fell apart, she had known better. "What are you doing here?" The voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Dr. Richard Pellegrini stood in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Behind him, 2 residents shuffled nervously, clipboards pressed against their chests like shields. Ava straightened, her hands finding their familiar grip on the mop handle. "Cleaning, sir. Night maintenance." Pellegrini's eyes narrowed as he took in her position, too close to the monitors, too focused on the patient. "This is a restricted area. VIP wing has specific protocols." "I have clearance for all floors," Ava replied quietly, but her voice carried an edge that made the residents glance at each other. "Clearance to clean, not to gawk." Pellegrini stepped into the room, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. "Mr. Sorrentino's condition is none of your concern. We have the finest medical minds in the country working on this case." Ava's jaw tightened. She watched Pellegrini's gaze sweep over Dominic's chart, the same chart she had glimpsed moments before. Test after test, all normal. All missing the obvious. "Of course, sir," she said, but something in her tone made Pellegrini pause. "Is there something you'd like to say?" His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a threat. Ava met his eyes for just a moment, long enough to let him see that she wasn't afraid, that she knew something he didn't. Then she lowered her gaze and moved her cart toward the door. "No, sir, just doing my job." As she walked away, she heard one of the residents whisper to Pellegrini, "Sir, what if we're missing something? The symptoms don't add up." "Missing something?" Pellegrini's laugh was sharp. "From a janitor, the best diagnosticians in Baltimore are on this case. We don't need input from the cleaning staff." But Ava had already seen the doubt creeping into his eyes. She had seen the way his confidence wavered when she looked at him directly. He was smart enough to know when someone else possessed knowledge he lacked. and Dominic Sorrentino was dying from something any first-year toxicology student should have caught. The hallway stretched before her like a challenge, each step carrying her further from the room where a man's life hung in the balance. But Ava had learned patience in these corridors. She had learned to watch and wait and move in the spaces between other people's blindness. As she turned the corner toward the service elevator, she heard Pellegrini's voice echoing down the hall. "Run the tests again, all of them. And this time, check for..." The elevator doors closed before she could hear the rest, but Ava already knew what they wouldn't find, because they were looking in all the wrong places, and she was done being invisible. Hi, viewer. Glad you're here. Leave a like, share your thoughts about the story in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's keep going. The Johns Hopkins VIP wing operated under an unspoken code that Ava had learned through years of careful observation. The scent of leather and power lingered in these halls, expensive cologne mixing with the antiseptic smell of medical equipment, creating an atmosphere where money and mortality danced together in careful choreography. Here, silence was currency. The night shift staff moved like ghosts through corridors lined with mahogany panels and soft lighting that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Crystal chandeliers cast warm shadows over marble floors so polished they reflected the designer suits of visiting dignitaries and the tailored lab coats of attending physicians. Ava understood the rules without ever being told. Don't look directly at the patients. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist in any way that might disturb the careful ecosystem of wealth and wellness. She had perfected the art of invisibility, becoming part of the furniture, just another piece of equipment wheeled through these halls after midnight. Her cart contained the same supplies as any other floor: industrial-strength disinfectant, microfiber cloths, trash bags, floor polish. But in the VIP wing, even cleaning became performance art. No harsh chemical smells that might offend sensitive noses, no squeaking wheels that could disturb a senator's rest, no sudden movements that might startle the wife of a pharmaceutical CEO. The textures here told stories. Persian rugs cushioned footsteps in the family waiting areas, their intricate patterns hiding decades of whispered conversations about inheritance and power. Original artwork hung on walls that never saw graffiti or scuff marks, each piece worth more than Ava's annual salary. Even the trash cans were made of brushed steel that gleamed under the carefully calibrated lighting. Room 1247 held the most important patient, Dominic Sorrentino, whose name carried weight in circles Ava could only imagine. She had heard fragments of conversation over the past week. Pharmaceutical companies, real estate empires, political connections that stretched from Baltimore to Capitol Hill. But wealth, she had learned, couldn't buy immunity from the microscopic world of toxins and poisons. The sound of her footsteps on marble had become her heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the steady hum of ventilation systems designed to filter not just air, but the very essence of ordinary life from these corridors. Even her breathing seemed muted here, as if the atmosphere itself demanded reverence. Natalie Parisi emerged from room 1251, her scrubs crisp despite the late hour. She was one of the few staff members who acknowledged Ava's existence with more than a dismissive glance. Tonight, exhaustion lined her features as she documented medication schedules on a tablet. "Another long night," Natalie murmured as Ava passed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They all are," Ava replied softly, pausing to empty a wastebasket filled with discarded test results and empty coffee cups from specialists who had given up hours ago. Through the observation window of room 1247, she could see the machines monitoring Dominic's vital signs, the steady beep of his heart rate mixed with the mechanical whisper of the ventilator, assisting his breathing. Charts mounted on the wall displayed test results that told a story of medical confusion. Normal liver function, clean blood panels, neurological assessments that revealed nothing unusual. But Ava saw what they missed: the subtle yellowing of his fingernails, the way his hair lay thinner against the expensive pillows, the slight discoloration around his gums that spoke of cellular damage occurring at levels too small for standard tests to detect. She had seen this pattern before, in medical textbooks she still studied in her cramped apartment, in research papers downloaded from library computers when her shifts ended. Most importantly, she had seen it in her father's final weeks, symptoms dismissed as stress and age by doctors who never looked beyond their assumptions. The VIP wing demanded discretion, but some truths refused to remain hidden. As Ava moved through the corridors, she carried knowledge that could save a life, if anyone would listen to a voice they had trained themselves never to hear. The summons came at 4:30 in the morning, delivered by Frank Monaco, with the kind of quiet authority that made questioning impossible. Ava had been sanitizing the family lounge when the security guard appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space despite his measured movements. "You need to come with me," Frank said, his voice carrying undertones of something between warning and protection. "Room 1247, now." Ava's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. In the VIP wing, sudden requests usually meant either opportunity or disaster. She followed Frank through corridors that felt different at this hour, the shadows deeper, the silence more complete. Her footsteps echoed softly against marble floors that reflected the emergency lighting in fractured patterns. Room 1247 had been transformed into a command center. Dr. Pellegrini stood beside Dominic's bed, flanked by two specialists Ava recognized from previous nights. Charts and tablets covered every available surface, displaying test results that painted a picture of medical frustration. But it was the figure seated in the leather chair beside the window that commanded attention. Dominic Sorrentino was awake. His eyes, sharp despite his weakened condition, tracked Ava's entrance with predatory precision. The machines monitoring his vital signs continued their steady chorus, but something in his gaze suggested a mind operating at full capacity despite his body's deterioration. "You're the cleaning woman," Dominic said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The one Dr. Pellegrini mentioned." Ava nodded, acutely aware of the specialist's attention focused on her like spotlights. "Yes, sir. Richard here tells me you've been asking questions about my condition." Dominic's smile held no warmth. Curious behavior for someone paid to empty wastebaskets. Dr. Pellegrini shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Sorrentino, I assure you this woman has no medical training. Whatever concerns she expressed were dismissed immediately," Dominic finished, his eyes never leaving Ava's face. "Yes, Richard explained your efficient handling of the situation." His tone carried implications that made Pellegrini's jaw tighten. The room fell silent except for the mechanical whisper of medical equipment. Ava felt the weight of examination, of being measured against expectations she didn't understand. This was a test, though the parameters remained unclear. "Tell me," Dominic continued, "what exactly did you observe about my condition that these distinguished physicians missed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ava glanced at Pellegrini, whose expression warned against speaking, then at the specialists whose careers depended on maintaining their reputations. Frank Monaco stood by the door, his position suggesting both protection and containment. "I wouldn't presume to question medical expertise," Ava said carefully. "But you did presume," Dominic replied, leaning forward despite the IV lines restricting his movement. "You looked at me, really looked, and saw something others didn't. I want to know what that was." The machines beeped steadily, marking time in a room where power dynamics shifted with each spoken word. Ava understood she was being drawn into something larger than medical curiosity. This was about authority, about knowledge, about the dangerous territory where truth intersected with hierarchy. "I've seen similar symptoms before," she admitted finally. "Pattern recognition from personal experience." Personal experience. Dominic's repetition carried weight. Not textbook learning, not theoretical knowledge, experience. He studied her face with the intensity of someone used to reading people for survival. What kind of experience teaches a janitor to diagnose what specialists cannot? Dr. Pellegrini moved closer to the bed. "Mr. Sorrentino encouraging this woman's delusions." "Richard." The single word silenced the physician completely. Dominic's attention remained fixed on Ava, and she realized this moment would define everything that followed. The test had begun, and failure meant returning to invisibility forever. "The kind that costs everything," Ava said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of loss that money couldn't heal. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Recognition, perhaps. or the predatory satisfaction of discovering prey more interesting than expected. "Sit down," Dominic commanded, gesturing toward a chair that had been positioned directly across from his bed. The specialists exchanged glances, but none dared protest. Ava remained standing for a moment, understanding that accepting the seat meant accepting whatever game he intended to play. She sat, her cleaning uniform a stark contrast to the expensive fabrics and polished surfaces surrounding her. The leather chair was still warm from a previous occupant, Dr. Pellegrini, she realized, who now stood with rigid posture near the wall-mounted monitors. "My time is running out," Dominic said, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone comfortable discussing mortality. "These gentlemen have exhausted their conventional approaches, so I'm going to try something unconventional." His smile held predatory amusement. "Tell me what you see." Ava felt the weight of 12 pairs of eyes focused on her. The room's atmosphere had shifted from medical consultation to gladiatorial arena, with her knowledge as the weapon and Dominic's life as the prize. "Your fingernails?" she began, her voice steadying as she found familiar ground. "They're yellowed, but not from nicotine. The discoloration starts at the cuticle and fades toward the tip, consistent with slow absorption of a lipophilic compound over several weeks." Dr. Pellegrini's sharp intake of breath was audible. One of the specialists moved closer to examine Dominic's hands, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "Continue," Dominic said, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Your hair is thinning in a specific pattern, not male pattern baldness, but diffuse loss that suggests cellular disruption at the follicular level. Combined with the slight tremor in your left hand and the inflammation around your gum line, it indicates systematic poisoning by a heavy metal compound." The silence stretched taut as surgical wire. Dr. Pellegrini's face had gone pale, while the other physicians began reviewing charts with sudden urgency. Ava watched recognition dawn in their expressions, the pieces falling into place that should have been obvious weeks ago. "Thallium," she said quietly, the word cutting through the room like a scalpel. Odorless, tasteless, absorbed through skin contact. It mimics neurological disorders in early stages, making diagnosis difficult unless you know exactly what to look for. Dominic leaned back against his pillows, genuine surprise flickering across his features. How does a janitor know about thallium poisoning? The question carried layers of implication. Ava felt the dangerous territory opening beneath her feet, personal history that could expose her completely or establish her credibility forever. "My father died of thallium poisoning 3 years ago," she said, her voice carrying controlled emotion. "Listed as natural causes, stress and age according to the attending physician." She glanced at Dr. Pellegrini. "But I was a third-year medical student then. I recognized the symptoms, requested specific tests, was told I was overreacting, that grief was clouding my judgment." The room's temperature seemed to drop. Dominic studied her with newfound intensity, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Medical student?" "Former medical student. Had to drop out after my parents died. Couldn't afford tuition and support my sister simultaneously." Ava met his gaze directly. "But I never stopped studying. Toxicology specifically. Some knowledge doesn't require a degree." Frank Lomonaco shifted position near the door, his protective stance more pronounced. The specialists huddled around Dominic's chart, their whispered consultations growing urgent. "Test for thallium," Dominic ordered, his voice cutting through the medical conference. "Comprehensive screening, hair, nails, urine, everything." Dr. Pellegrini opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. The hierarchy in the room had shifted, and they all felt it. Dominic's attention returned to Ava, his expression calculating. "You've just made yourself very valuable," he said quietly. "Or very dangerous. In my experience, the two are often indistinguishable." The test had revealed more than medical knowledge. It had exposed a mind capable of seeing patterns others missed, and a determination forged by personal tragedy that couldn't be easily intimidated. The thallium test results arrived 18 hours later, carried into room 1247 by a lab technician whose hands trembled as he delivered the report. Dr. Pellegrini's face drained of color as he read the findings aloud to the assembled specialists, each word falling like a hammer blow against their professional reputations. Thallium concentration, 0. 8 micrograms per gram of hair. Acute exposure. Consistent with ongoing absorption over 4 to 6 weeks. Pellegrini's voice cracked slightly. Immediate chelation therapy required to prevent permanent neurological damage. Dominic received the news with the calm of someone accustomed to life-threatening revelations, but his eyes sought Ava immediately, finding her stationed near the wall where Frank Monaco had positioned her like a valuable asset requiring protection. "Closer," Dominic commanded, and Ava approached his bedside. The specialists parted reluctantly, their earlier dismissal replaced by wary respect tinged with resentment. "You saved my life," Dominic said quietly, his voice carrying implications that extended far beyond medical gratitude. That creates obligations on both sides. The room's atmosphere had shifted dramatically since Ava's diagnosis proved accurate. No longer invisible, she found herself the center of attention that felt more dangerous than anonymity. Every specialist in the room now saw her as either a threat to their authority or a weapon they might wield against their competitors. "The treatment protocol is complex," Dr. Pellegrini began, his attempt to regain control obvious to everyone present. "Chelation therapy requires careful monitoring." "How long?" Dominic interrupted, his focus remaining on Ava. She understood he wasn't asking about treatment duration. The question carried weight beyond medical concerns. It was about time, opportunity, and the dangerous window that had opened with her revelation. "The poisoning has been systematic," Ava said, choosing her words carefully. "Whoever administered the thallium had intimate knowledge of your routines, your personal care products, your daily schedule. They're still here, still have access, and they know the diagnosis has changed." The specialists exchanged nervous glances. Frank Monaco moved closer to the door, his hand resting casually near his jacket. The implications of Ava's words settled over the room like a chemical cloud, dense, invisible, and potentially lethal. "You're suggesting someone in my inner circle is responsible," Dominic said, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded violence in his world. "I'm suggesting someone with daily access and detailed knowledge of your personal habits," Ava corrected. "The delivery method requires intimacy, trust, regular contact over weeks." Dominic's expression hardened as he processed the betrayal. In his universe, loyalty was currency, and treachery was a capital offense. But identifying the traitor would require more than suspicion. It would demand proof that could survive the scrutiny of people accustomed to eliminating evidence. "The lotion," Ava continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Every day someone brings you a new bottle of that expensive skincare product. Italian import, distinctive packaging. I've seen the same person deliver it consistently, someone you trust enough to accept personal items without question." The machines monitoring Dominic's vital signs registered his increasing heart rate as rage built beneath his controlled exterior. Ava watched him catalogue his daily visitors, mentally reviewing weeks of routine interactions that had masked attempted murder. "Anthony Bellocchio," Frank Monaco said from his position near the door, his voice carrying grim certainty. "Right-hand man for 15 years, handles personal scheduling, brings the daily amenities, has keys to your private residence." The name hung in the air like an indictment. Dominic's eyes narrowed as pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. Recent business decisions, subtle challenges to his authority, conversations that had felt slightly off in retrospect. "Test the lotion," Dominic ordered, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "And bring Anthony to me. Tonight." Ava felt the temperature in the room drop as she realized her diagnosis had unleashed forces that operated by rules far removed from medical ethics. The threat arrived at dawn, disguised as routine hospital business. Ava was changing linens in room 1252 when she heard Dr. Pellegrini's voice echoing down the corridor, sharp with barely controlled panic. "Media leak. Someone contacted the Baltimore Sun about Sorrentino's condition. Questions about medical malpractice, delayed diagnosis, potential cover-up." His words carried the weight of career destruction. "They're sending investigative reporters this morning." The news rippled through the VIP wing like a seismic shock. Within minutes, hospital administrators materialized in expensive suits, their hushed conversations creating an undercurrent of crisis management. Ava watched the choreography of damage control unfold. Lawyers summoned, public relations consultants briefed, medical records secured under lock and key. But it was the phone call she overheard that changed everything. Ava had been replacing towels in the family lounge when Anthony Bellocchio's voice drifted through the partially open door of the adjacent conference room. His tone carried the careful modulation of someone accustomed to conducting sensitive business. "The timeline works in our favor," Anthony was saying, his voice low but audible through the thin walls. "Medical confusion, delayed treatment, natural progression of illness. Even if they discover the thallium now, the damage is done. In a few weeks, Dominic will be dead, and the questions will focus on hospital negligence, not deliberate poisoning." Ava froze, her hands gripping the clean towels as the implications crashed over her. The media leak wasn't accidental. It was strategic misdirection, designed to focus scrutiny on medical failure rather than murder. "The reporter is already writing the story," Anthony continued. "Prestigious hospital, dying billionaire, arrogant doctors missing obvious symptoms. It's a narrative that sells itself. By the time anyone thinks to investigate other possibilities, the evidence will be cremated with the body." The casual brutality of his words sent ice through Ava's veins. She pressed closer to the door, straining to hear more. "What about the cleaning woman?" Anthony's voice carried a note of concern. "She identified the poisoning. That complicates things." Ava's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. She was exposed, vulnerable, a loose thread in a carefully woven plan. "Handle it quietly," came another voice, older, authoritative, unfamiliar. "Make it look accidental. Hospital worker, single mother, probably works multiple jobs, easy target for a tragic accident." The words hit her like physical blows. They weren't just planning to let Dominic die. They intended to eliminate her as a witness. The knowledge she had gained to save a life now marked her for death. Footsteps approached the conference room door. Ava moved quickly, wheeling her cart toward the service elevator with practiced silence. Her mind raced through options as the elevator descended to the basement level where cleaning supplies were stored. She needed help, but who could she trust? Dr. Pellegrini was focused on protecting his reputation. The specialists were concerned with covering their missed diagnosis. Frank Monaco worked for Dominic, but Anthony was part of Dominic's inner circle. Then she thought of Natalie Parisi. The elevator opened into the basement storage area, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows over industrial shelving. Ava pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through contacts until she found Natalie's number. "I need to see you," she texted quickly. "Emergency, not safe to talk here. Meet me in the parking garage, level B2, in 20 minutes. The response came immediately. "What's wrong?" Ava hesitated, then typed, "Someone is trying to kill me because I know too much about Dominic's poisoning. They leaked the story to create cover for murder. I have proof." The silence stretched for long minutes before Natalie's reply appeared. "I'm coming. Stay hidden until I get there." Ava deleted the message thread and powered off her phone. In 20 minutes, she would either find an ally or discover that her trust had been catastrophically misplaced. Either way, the invisible woman was about to step fully into the light, where both salvation and destruction waited in equal measure. Natalie Parisi arrived in the parking garage with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a double shift, but her eyes held the sharp focus that came with years of critical care experience. She found Ava crouched between two vehicles on level B2, the fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. "Show me what you have," Natalie said without preamble, her voice echoing in the underground space. Ava pulled out her phone, hands still trembling, as she replayed the conversation she had recorded through the conference room door. Anthony's voice carried clearly in the garage's acoustics, each word building a case for premeditated murder, disguised as medical malpractice. Natalie's face grew pale as she listened. When Anthony's voice discussed eliminating Ava as a witness, the nurse's jaw tightened with professional outrage. "We need to get you to safety," Natalie said immediately. "And we need to warn Dominic that his inner circle is compromised." "How?" Ava's voice carried the weight of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Anthony controls access to Dominic. The hospital administration is focused on damage control, and whoever Anthony is working with has enough power to orchestrate media leaks and arrange accidents. The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of ventilation systems. Both women understood they were trapped between competing forces: Anthony's conspiracy on one side, institutional self-preservation on the other, and their own survival hanging in the balance. "Frank Monaco," Natalie said suddenly. "Dominic's security. He's been watching everything, and I've seen him looking suspicious of Anthony lately. If anyone can get us direct access to Dominic, it's Frank." Ava considered this carefully. Frank had positioned himself protectively during the medical consultations, and his comment identifying Anthony had carried the weight of existing suspicion. But trusting anyone in Dominic's orbit felt like stepping into a minefield. "There's something else," Ava said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Anthony mentioned someone else on that call, an older voice, authoritative. "This isn't just about Anthony wanting to inherit or take over. He's working for someone outside Dominic's organization." The implications settled over them like a chemical reaction, slow, invisible, but fundamentally changing everything. If Anthony was an agent for external interests, then Dominic's death was part of a larger corporate or political strategy. The poisoning wasn't personal revenge. It was a hostile takeover disguised as natural causes. "We need to move fast," Natalie said, checking her watch. "The morning shift change happens in 30 minutes. That's when the garage will be busy enough to provide cover, but also when Anthony will expect you to report for duty." Ava felt the walls closing in around her carefully constructed, invisible life. For 3 years, she had moved through these corridors without leaving footprints. Now, her survival depended on stepping fully into the light and trusting people whose motivations she couldn't fully understand. "If we approach Frank directly, we're betting our lives that he's loyal to Dominic, rather than whoever is paying Anthony," Ava said. "If we don't approach him, you're dead by tonight, and Dominic dies within the week," Natalie replied bluntly. "Sometimes the only choice is between bad options and worse ones." The elevator chimed softly as it descended toward their level. Both women tensed, but it was Frank Monaco who emerged, his presence filling the garage with quiet authority. "Looking for you," he said to Ava, his voice carrying none of its usual measured calm. "Anthony just called down to security. Said you missed your scheduled check-in. Wanted to know if we'd seen you leaving the building." Ava and Natalie exchanged glances. The hunt had begun, and their window of safety was closing faster than they had anticipated. "We need to talk," Natalie said to Frank. "All of us, right now, about who's really trying to kill Dominic Sorrentino." Frank Monaco listened to the recorded conversation with the focused intensity of someone trained to assess threats. His expression grew darker with each word, and when Anthony's voice discussed eliminating Ava as a witness, Frank's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "How long have you suspected?" Natalie asked when the recording ended. 3 weeks, Frank replied, his voice carrying the weight of professional regret. "Anthony's been acting different, too interested in medical schedules, asking questions about security protocols he never cared about before. But suspicion isn't proof, and in Dominic's world, accusations without evidence can be fatal." The parking garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces as they huddled between the concrete pillars. Ava felt the surreal nature of the moment. 3 hospital workers planning to expose a murder conspiracy in the basement of one of America's most prestigious medical institutions. "We need to get this information to Dominic directly," Ava said. "But Anthony controls access to his room. How do we bypass that?" Frank's smile held no warmth. "Anthony thinks he controls access, but Dominic has survival instincts that kept him alive in environments where trust meant death. There are communication channels Anthony doesn't know about." He pulled out a phone, not his regular device, but a secondary one that looked government-issued. "Emergency protocol. Dominic insists on backup communication that bypasses normal security channels. Paranoia saved his life more than once." As Frank typed a coded message, Ava's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something about the timing made her hesitate before answering. "Don't," Natalie warned, but Ava had already accepted the call. "Miss D'Amico." The voice was Anthony's, smooth and courteous in a way that made her skin crawl. "You've missed your scheduled check-in. We're concerned about your welfare." Ava caught Frank's eye, and he nodded grimly, pulling out a small device that she recognized as a recording unit. "I'm fine," Ava replied carefully, "just running behind schedule." "Of course, these things happen." Anthony's tone carried undertones of barely concealed threat. "Perhaps we should meet to discuss your recent observations regarding Mr. Sorrentino's condition. Your insights have been quite valuable." The word valuable carried implications that sent ice through Ava's veins. In Anthony's world, valuable things were either protected or eliminated, depending on their potential for causing problems. "I appreciate the recognition," Ava said, playing for time while Frank continued recording. "Where would you like to meet?" "Room 1247 would be appropriate. Mr. Sorrentino is very interested in speaking with you again. He's quite impressed by your diagnostic abilities." Ava felt the trap closing around her. Anthony was using Dominic as bait, counting on her sense of responsibility to draw her into a controlled environment where elimination could be staged as a medical emergency or security incident. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. "Excellent. And Miss D'Amico, come alone. Mr. Sorrentino values privacy in his medical consultations." The call ended, and Frank immediately began typing urgent messages on his emergency phone. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Natalie said. "Probably both," Ava admitted. "But if I don't show up, Anthony will know we're onto him. He'll accelerate whatever timeline he's working under." Frank's phone buzzed with a response. His expression shifted as he read the message, and when he looked up, his eyes held grim satisfaction. Dominic got the message. He's been expecting something like this. The paranoia I mentioned works both ways. He's known someone in his inner circle was compromised. He just needed proof of who. Frank showed them the response. "Bring her up through service entrance. Security sweep shows Anthony left building 10 minutes ago. Move now." Relief flooded through Ava, followed immediately by new concern. If Anthony left the building, where did he go? And why call me to meet if he wasn't going to be there? The question hung in the air as the implications became clear. Anthony's absence meant the meeting was a setup, but for what purpose? And if he wasn't planning to handle Ava's elimination personally, who was? Natalie's face had gone pale. "He's not eliminating you at the hospital. Too much scrutiny with the media attention. He's drawing you away from the building, probably to stage an accident somewhere else." Frank was already moving toward the elevator. "We go to Dominic now. If Anthony is executing the final phase of his plan, we need to know what other surprises he's prepared." As they rode the elevator toward the VIP wing, Ava felt the weight of transformation settling over her. 3 days ago, she had been invisible, moving through these corridors without leaving footprints. Now she was walking into the center of a power struggle that operated by rules she barely understood, carrying information that could determine who lived and who died. The elevator doors opened onto the familiar marble floors of the VIP wing, but nothing felt familiar anymore. Every shadow could hide a threat, every sound could signal danger, and the careful ecosystem of wealth and power that had seemed so stable was revealing itself to be built on foundations of betrayal and violence. Room 1247 waited ahead, where a dying man held the power to transform her from invisible witness to protected asset, if she could survive long enough to reach him. Room 1247 had been transformed into a fortress. Frank Lomonaco led Ava and Natalie through the service entrance, bypassing the main corridor where hospital staff moved with unusual urgency. Inside, Dominic sat propped against pillows that couldn't disguise his weakened condition, but his eyes burned with the focused intensity of someone preparing for war. "Show me everything," he commanded, before any formal greetings could be exchanged. Ava played the recorded conversation, watching Dominic's expression harden with each revelation. When Anthony's voice discussed timing Dominic's death to coincide with media coverage of hospital negligence, something dangerous flickered across the powerful man's features. 15 years. Dominic said quietly when the recording ended. Anthony has been at my side for 15 years, knows my routines, my weaknesses, my business strategies. Whoever turned him has been planning this for a very long time. Frank positioned himself near the door, his hand resting near his weapon. The older voice on the recording, "I've been thinking about that. Someone with enough authority to coordinate media leaks, arrange accidents, and convince Anthony to commit treason against someone he's served for over a decade." Natalie moved to check the medical equipment, her nursing instincts automatically monitoring Dominic's vital signs. "The chelation therapy is working, but slowly. You're still vulnerable for at least another week. Vulnerable enough to die from natural causes if the right pressure is applied," Dominic observed grimly. "A sudden medical crisis, complications from the poisoning. Tragic but explainable. The perfect cover for assassination." Ava felt the weight of realization settling over the room. "That's why Anthony left the building. He's not planning to eliminate me here. He's preparing the final stage of the poisoning. Something that will look like medical complications, but ensure you don't survive long enough to expose the conspiracy." Dominic's phone buzzed with an incoming message. His expression darkened as he read it, and when he looked up, his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had survived decades in environments where trust was a luxury and betrayal was currency. "Dr. Pellegrini requests an emergency consultation. Apparently, there are concerns about potential complications from the chelation therapy. He wants to discuss adjusting the treatment protocol immediately." Dominic's smile held no warmth. Convenient timing. The implications crashed over them like a chemical reaction. Dr. Pellegrini, who had dismissed Ava's initial observations, was now suggesting medical interventions that could provide cover for finishing what the thallium had started. "He's been compromised," Frank said, his voice carrying grim certainty. "Either he's part of the conspiracy, or Anthony has found a way to leverage him." Ava remembered Pellegrini's panic about the media leak, his desperate concern for his professional reputation. "Blackmail," she said suddenly. "Medical malpractice accusations, career destruction, professional humiliation. Anthony doesn't need willing conspirators, just terrified ones who can be manipulated into cooperation." Dominic leaned forward, despite the IV lines restricting his movement. "Pellegrini thinks he's protecting his career by adjusting my treatment. He doesn't realize he's being used to commit murder." "So what do we do?" Natalie asked. "If Pellegrini shows up with a medical order that could kill you, how do we stop him without exposing our knowledge of the conspiracy?" The room fell silent, except for the mechanical whisper of medical equipment. Ava felt the weight of expertise that had saved Dominic's life, once pressing against the realization that her knowledge might be needed again. "We let him come," Dominic said finally. "But we document everything. Record the consultation, capture whatever medical justification he provides for changing my treatment. When this is over, we'll need evidence that shows the pattern of manipulation." Frank pulled out his recording device again. "What about Anthony? He's still out there, still capable of implementing backup plans if this approach fails." "Anthony made a critical mistake," Dominic replied, his voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded violence in his world. "He assumed I trusted him completely, but survival in my business requires maintaining operational security, even from your closest allies." He reached toward his bedside table, retrieving a small device that looked like a medical monitor, but carried additional components. "GPS tracking on all my personal items, including the lotion bottles Anthony brings daily. Real-time location data, stored on secure servers that he doesn't know exist." Ava understood immediately. "You can track where he goes, who he meets with, when he acquires the materials for the poisoning." "More than that," Dominic said with grim satisfaction. "I can prove conspiracy, identify co-conspirators, and build a case that will survive legal scrutiny. Anthony thinks he's executing the perfect crime, but he's actually creating a documented trail of evidence." The machines monitoring Dominic's vital signs registered his increasing heart rate as adrenaline overrode the effects of medication. Ava recognized the symptoms of someone transitioning from victim to predator, using knowledge and preparation to transform disadvantage into strategic advantage. "Dr. Pellegrini will be here in 20 minutes, Natalie observed, checking her watch. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to decide now." Dominic's eyes found Ava's, and she saw recognition there. Not just gratitude for saving his life, but acknowledgement of partnership in something larger than medical diagnosis. "Time to find out who else wants me dead," Dominic said quietly, "and why they think they can succeed where Anthony failed." Dr. Pellegrini arrived precisely on schedule, his silver hair immaculate despite the early hour, and his hands carrying a tablet loaded with treatment modifications that could determine whether Dominic lived or died. Behind him walked Dr. Elias Kim, a quiet resident whose presence seemed almost accidental, but whose eyes held an alertness that suggested careful observation. "Mr. Sorrentino," Pellegrini began, his voice carrying forced confidence. "After reviewing your chelation therapy progress, we've identified some concerning patterns that require immediate intervention." Ava watched from her position near the wall, officially invisible, but acutely aware of every nuance in Pellegrini's presentation. Frank had positioned the recording device to capture both audio and video, while Natalie monitored the medical equipment with professional focus. "What kind of concerns?" Dominic asked, his tone carefully neutral. Pellegrini consulted his tablet with theatrical precision. "The current chelation protocol may be too aggressive for your specific toxicity levels. We're seeing indicators that suggest potential kidney damage if we continue at the current dosage. I'm recommending a reduction in the chelating agent and introduction of supportive medications to protect organ function." The words sounded reasonable, professionally justified, and medically sound. But Ava's toxicology knowledge screamed warnings. Reducing chelation therapy at this critical stage would allow remaining thallium to continue its cellular damage, while the suggested supportive medications could mask symptoms of ongoing poisoning. Dr. Kim stepped forward slightly. "Actually, sir, I've been reviewing the literature on thallium poisoning protocols, and current medical guidelines recommend maintaining aggressive chelation for at least 72 hours after initial treatment begins. Reducing dosage prematurely could result in redistribution of the toxin." Pellegrini's expression tightened. "Dr. Kim, while your academic research is admirable, clinical experience takes precedence over textbook recommendations. Mr. Sorrentino's age and overall health status require modified approaches." "Show me the specific indicators," Dominic demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to examining evidence before accepting conclusions. As Pellegrini manipulated data on his tablet, Ava noticed Dr. Kim's subtle movements. The young resident was photographing the proposed treatment modifications with his phone, capturing evidence of medical decisions that could later be analyzed for legitimacy. "The kidney function markers here," Pellegrini said, displaying charts that showed concerning trends. "And these liver enzymes suggest we're pushing his system beyond safe limits." Ava studied the displayed data, her pattern recognition skills engaging automatically. Something about the numbers felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly aligned to justify exactly the treatment reduction that would ensure Dominic's death. "Those numbers are falsified," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the medical consultation like a scalpel. The room fell silent. Pellegrini's face drained of color, while Dr. Kim moved closer to examine the tablet display. Frank's hand shifted position near his weapon, and Natalie's attention locked onto the monitors showing Dominic's actual vital signs. "Excuse me," Pellegrini's voice carried dangerous undertones. "The kidney function markers," Ava continued, stepping away from the wall. "They don't match the baseline readings from yesterday's actual lab results. Someone altered the data to justify reducing chelation therapy." "Doctor." Kim pulled out his own device, accessing the hospital's laboratory database. "She's right. The numbers on your tablet don't correspond to the official lab reports filed this morning. The actual kidney function is well within normal parameters." Pellegrini's carefully constructed authority began crumbling. These readings came directly from the laboratory. "If there's a discrepancy—" "The discrepancy," Dominic interrupted, his voice carrying deadly calm, "is between truth and fabrication. Someone provided you with false data to justify a treatment modification that would ensure my death." The recording device captured every word as Pellegrini realized the trap closing around him. His professional reputation, his medical license, his entire career hung in the balance of decisions he had been manipulated into making. I don't understand, Pellegrini said, but his voice lacked conviction. The data came through official channels. Anthony Bellocchio coordinated with the laboratory to expedite results due to media pressure. Anthony, Frank repeated grimly, who has been orchestrating every aspect of this conspiracy, including manipulating medical professionals into committing involuntary murder. Dr. Kim was typing rapidly on his device, cross-referencing laboratory protocols and chain of custody procedures. Dr. Pellegrini, when did you last verify these results independently? Did you personally review the original lab reports, or did you accept pre-processed data? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Pellegrini's face showed recognition dawning, the realization that his medical judgment had been compromised by external manipulation, that his fear of professional humiliation had made him vulnerable to conspiracy. I trusted the coordination process, Pellegrini admitted quietly. With media scrutiny and administrative pressure, I accepted expedited reporting to ensure rapid response to any medical complications. Expedited reporting, controlled by the same person who has been systematically poisoning my patient, Dominic observed. How convenient. Ava watched the transformation in Pellegrini's expression as professional pride warred with survival instinct. He was beginning to understand that he had been positioned as either a willing accomplice or a convenient scapegoat in a murder conspiracy that operated with sophisticated medical knowledge. "What do you want from me?" Pellegrini asked finally, his voice carrying defeat and desperate calculation. Dominic's smile held no warmth. "I want you to continue exactly as Anthony instructed, but this time, we're going to document everything and find out who else thinks they can manipulate my medical care for their own purposes." The consequences arrived like a tsunami in slow motion, beginning with a phone call that shattered the careful equilibrium Dominic had maintained for decades. Frank Lomonaco answered his secure device with the grim efficiency of someone expecting bad news, but his expression grew darker than Ava had ever seen as he listened to the caller's report. "Anthony's gone underground," Frank announced after ending the call. "Disappeared 3 hours ago, along with files from your private office, financial records, and contact information for every business associate you've dealt with in the past 5 years." Dominic received this information with the stoic calm of someone who had survived previous betrayals, but Ava could see the calculation behind his eyes, not just personal betrayal, but the systematic dismantling of professional relationships that had taken decades to build. "He's not just running," Dominic said quietly. "He's burning everything down behind him. Whoever hired Anthony wants more than my death. They want the complete destruction of my organization's operational capacity." Dr. Pellegrini stood in the corner like a man watching his own execution, understanding that his manipulation into near murder had been merely one component of a much larger operation. His medical reputation was ruined regardless of legal outcomes, but now he faced potential criminal charges for conspiracy to commit murder. "The media story breaks in 6 hours," Natalie said, checking her phone for news updates. "Baltimore Sun is running with hospital negligence angle, complete with anonymous sources detailing systematic failures in your medical care. They're positioning this as institutional incompetence rather than deliberate poisoning." Ava watched the strategy unfold with growing comprehension. The media narrative would focus public attention on medical malpractice while providing cover for Anthony's disappearance and Dominic's eventual death from complications. Even if the poisoning was eventually discovered, the story would be buried beneath headlines about hospital failures and regulatory investigations. "My sister," Ava said suddenly, ice flooding her veins. "Chloe D'Amico, if Anthony knows about me, he knows about my family." Frank was already dialing before she finished speaking. His conversation was brief and tense, conducted in coded language that suggested operational security protocols Ava hadn't known existed. "Protective detail is in place," Frank reported. "But they found evidence of surveillance. Someone has been watching your sister's apartment for at least 48 hours. The room seemed to contract around Ava as the full scope of her vulnerability became clear. Her decision to save Dominic's life had exposed not just herself but everyone she cared about to retaliation. From forces operating with resources and ruthlessness she was only beginning to understand. "They're using your family as leverage," Dominic observed, his voice carrying grim familiarity with such tactics. Standard procedure when dealing with inconvenient witnesses: isolate them, threaten what they value most, force compliance through fear. Dr. Kim, who had been quietly documenting the medical conspiracy on his phone, looked up with sudden urgency. "There's something else. I've been tracking the laboratory data manipulation, and it's not just your case, Mr. Sorrentino. Similar data alterations have occurred in at least 3 other VIP patient cases over the past 6 months. The implication hit the room like a physical blow. Anthony's operation wasn't targeting Dominic alone. It was part of a systematic campaign against multiple high-value individuals, using the hospital's prestigious reputation and advanced medical capabilities as cover for serial assassination." "Show me," Dominic demanded, his voice carrying dangerous intensity. Dr. Kim's tablet displayed a pattern of manipulated test results, altered treatment protocols, and convenient medical complications that had resulted in the deaths of a pharmaceutical executive, a federal judge, and a prominent investigative journalist. All patients who had received care in the VIP wing, all deaths attributed to natural causes or medical complications. "Jesus," Natalie whispered, "this isn't just murder. It's organized elimination of specific targets using the hospital as an assassination platform." Ava felt the weight of realization settling over her. Her toxicology knowledge, her pattern recognition skills, her invisible position in the hospital hierarchy. She wasn't just a witness to one attempted murder, but potentially the key to exposing a much larger operation that had been successfully killing influential people for months. "The older voice on the recording," she said, pieces clicking together. "Someone with enough authority to coordinate multiple assassinations, manipulate media coverage, and compromise medical professionals. This requires resources beyond what Anthony could access alone." Frank's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression grew even grimmer as he read the update. "Security footage from the past week has been systematically deleted," he reported, "but the backup systems I installed without Anthony's knowledge captured everything. We have visual proof of his meetings with external contacts, including license plate numbers and facial recognition data." Dominic leaned forward, despite the medical equipment restricting his movement. "Who was he meeting with?" "Corporate lawyers from Meridian Holdings," Frank replied, consulting his notes. "Real estate development firm that's been trying to acquire your Baltimore properties for 2 years. The same company that has contracts pending with the pharmaceutical company whose executive died here last month." The connections crystallized into a pattern that revealed scope beyond anything Ava had imagined. This wasn't personal vendetta or simple greed. It was corporate warfare conducted through medical assassination, using the hospital as an unwitting weapon in battles for business dominance. "They're eliminating obstacles to major real estate and pharmaceutical deals," Dominic said, his voice carrying cold comprehension. "Killing people whose deaths would benefit specific corporate interests, making it look like natural causes or medical negligence." Ava's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Your sister is safe for now. Withdraw your accusations about Mr. Sorrentino's care, return to your normal duties, and everyone stays healthy. You have 2 hours to comply." She showed the message to the others, and Frank immediately began implementing additional security protocols. But Ava understood the impossible position they had created for themselves. They possessed evidence of multiple murders, but using that evidence would trigger retaliation against innocent family members. "We can't prosecute this through normal legal channels," Dominic observed. "Too many people would die while we gathered admissible evidence, and Anthony's employers have resources to eliminate witnesses faster than the justice system can protect them." The room fell silent as they contemplated options that all carried unacceptable costs. Ava had saved one life and exposed a conspiracy that threatened dozens more, but the very knowledge that made her valuable also made her impossibly vulnerable. "There's another way," she said quietly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous. "We don't try to prosecute them through the legal system. We expose them using the same media manipulation they've been employing against their victims." Dominic's eyes sharpened with interest. "Explain." "We turn their own strategy against them," Ava continued. Give the Baltimore Sun the real story, not hospital negligence, but corporate assassination using medical facilities, complete with evidence, documentation, and testimony that makes denial impossible. The plan crystallized around them like a chemical reaction, complex but elegantly simple in its reversal of the conspiracy's own methods. Ava D'Amico stood before the assembled group in room 1247, her cleaning uniform replaced by scrubs that Natalie had procured, her invisible status transformed into something approaching command presence. The shift had been gradual but unmistakable, from witness to participant to someone whose expertise was driving strategy rather than simply providing evidence. "This is what we're going to do," she began, her voice carrying confidence forged through crisis. "We're going to give them exactly what they want initially, but on our terms, with our timeline, and with consequences they haven't anticipated." Dominic watched from his bed, medical equipment still monitoring his recovery, but his eyes sharp with predatory interest. Frank Lomonaco had positioned himself to monitor both the door and external communications, while Dr. Kim documented everything on devices that would later serve as legal evidence. "I'm going to call the number that sent the threat about Chloe," Ava continued. "I'm going to agree to their demands, return to normal duties, stop asking questions about your medical care, accept the hospital negligence narrative. But I'm going to demand proof that my sister is safe, and I'm going to negotiate a timeline that gives us operational space." Dr. Pellegrini, who had been silent since his complicity was exposed, spoke up with desperate urgency. "Miss D'Amico, you don't understand the forces you're dealing with. These people have resources that extend far beyond hospital manipulation. They can eliminate anyone who threatens their operations." "That's exactly why we're not going to threaten their operations," Ava replied. "We're going to become essential to them. They want a cover story about medical negligence. I'm going to provide the most convincing, detailed, professionally damaging testimony about hospital failures they could possibly imagine." The strategy began crystallizing as she spoke. Instead of fighting the conspiracy directly, they would embed themselves within it, providing such compelling false testimony that the conspirators would invest heavily in protecting their asset, giving Ava unprecedented access to their operational structure. "You want to become a double agent," Dominic observed, his tone carrying both admiration and concern. "Use their need for credible testimony to gain access to their organization." "More than that," Ava said, pulling out her phone to display the message thread with her sister. "Chloe has been documenting everything from her end, the surveillance, the people watching her apartment, the phone calls pressuring her to influence my decisions. She's been gathering evidence while pretending to be terrified." Frank's expression shifted to professional respect. "Your sister is operational. My sister is a single mother who's had to develop survival skills that most people never need," Ava corrected. "When someone threatens her daughter, she doesn't just get scared, she gets smart. She's been photographing license plates, recording conversations, and documenting patterns of surveillance that we can use to identify the operational structure." Natalie consulted her watch, tracking the 2-hour deadline imposed by the anonymous threat. "What about the Baltimore Sun story? If we're going to control that narrative, we need to move before they publish their version." "Dr. Kim has been building something better than testimony," Ava said, nodding toward the young resident. "Show them what you've compiled." Dr. Kim connected his tablet to the room's display screen, revealing a comprehensive database of medical manipulations spanning 6 months. Laboratory results, treatment modifications, patient outcomes, staff scheduling patterns, everything needed to demonstrate systematic use of the hospital for targeted assassinations. "This isn't just evidence of criminal activity," Dr. Kim explained. "It's a complete operational manual for how the conspiracy functions. Every step of their process, every vulnerability in hospital systems they've exploited, every person who's been compromised or eliminated." The data painted a picture of breathtaking scope and sophistication. Meridian Holdings had been using Johns Hopkins as an assassination platform to eliminate obstacles to corporate acquisitions, real estate developments, and pharmaceutical patents. The medical expertise required suggested involvement from someone with deep knowledge of hospital operations and access to administrative systems. Someone inside hospital administration is coordinating this, Dominic observed, studying the data patterns. This level of systematic manipulation requires authority that Anthony couldn't access independently. Frank was cross-referencing the surveillance data from his backup systems with Dr. Kim's medical documentation. I'm seeing meetings between Anthony and Dr. Margaret Chen, Chief of Hospital Administration. But she's scheduled for retirement next month, perfect timing to disappear before investigations could reach her. The pieces fell together with mechanical precision. Dr. Chen had provided administrative access for the conspiracy while planning her own exit strategy. Anthony had handled operational coordination and elimination of obstacles. Meridian Holdings had provided funding and target selection based on corporate interests. They're going to accelerate the timeline, Ava realized. With media attention increasing and my involvement exposing their methods, they'll want to complete their remaining targets and shut down the operation before it can be fully investigated. Her phone rang with the expected callback from the anonymous number. This time she answered immediately, putting the call on speaker so the others could monitor. Mr. Miko, I trust you've had time to consider our offer. I accept your terms, Ava said, her voice carrying carefully modulated reluctance. But I need guarantees, my sister's safety, protection from hospital retaliation when I testify about medical negligence, and assurance that my cooperation will be remembered favorably. Reasonable requests. We value professional relationships with people who understand practical necessities. The voice was cultured, corporate, carrying undertones of authority that suggested someone accustomed to negotiating high-stakes agreements. Ava recognized the tone from years of observing powerful people in the VIP wing, someone who controlled outcomes rather than merely implementing them. I also need to understand what you want from my testimony, Ava continued. If I'm going to convincingly blame hospital negligence for Mr. Sorrentino's condition, I need to know which specific failures you want emphasized. Excellent thinking. Dr. Chen will meet with you this afternoon to discuss the narrative framework. She understands both medical technicalities and legal vulnerabilities that need to be highlighted. The confirmation of Dr. Chen's involvement was exactly what they needed. But as Ava ended the call, she realized they were now committed to a strategy that required her to walk directly into the heart of the conspiracy with no backup plan if her deception was discovered. You understand what you're risking, Dominic said quietly. If they discover your real agenda, both you and your sister become immediate targets for elimination. They're already targets, Ava replied. The difference is, now we're fighting back with knowledge instead of just trying to survive with ignorance. She had learned to be invisible in these corridors, but invisibility was no longer an option. Now she needed to become indispensable, valuable enough to protect, trusted enough to access, and dangerous enough to respect. The meeting with Dr. Margaret Chen took place in a conference room that smelled of leather and expensive coffee, where original artwork hung on walls that had witnessed decades of decisions affecting life and death. Chen carried herself with the polished authority of someone who had climbed administrative hierarchies through careful cultivation of professional relationships and strategic management of institutional secrets. Ava entered the room wearing the same scrubs Natalie had provided, but now they felt less like disguise and more like armor. Hidden in her pocket was a recording device provided by Frank, sophisticated enough to capture audio through interference that Chen might deploy to prevent surveillance. Mr. Miko, Chen said, her smile carrying warmth that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for agreeing to help us resolve this unfortunate situation. Your cooperation will ensure that everyone's interests are protected. Ava took the offered seat, positioning herself to maintain visual contact while ensuring the recording device had optimal audio pickup. I want to understand exactly what kind of testimony you need and what guarantees I'll receive for my cooperation. Chen consulted a tablet loaded with what appeared to be legal documents and media strategies. The narrative is straightforward. Systematic failures in hospital protocols led to delayed diagnosis of Mr. Sorrentino's condition. Your observations as a cleaning staff member who noticed symptoms that medical professionals missed will be particularly compelling. The irony wasn't lost on Ava. They wanted her to tell a version of the truth, that she had recognized symptoms specialists missed, but frame it as systemic incompetence rather than deliberate poisoning. "What specific failures should I emphasize?" Ava asked, playing her role as cooperative witness. "Communication breakdowns between departments, arrogance preventing physicians from considering input from non-medical staff, overconfidence in standard diagnostic protocols when dealing with unusual presentations." Chen's list was comprehensive and professionally damaging to exactly the physicians who had dismissed Ava's initial concerns. As Chen spoke, Ava began understanding the sophisticated psychology behind the operation. The conspirators weren't just eliminating targets, they were systematically destroying institutional credibility, creating chaos that would benefit corporate interests while providing cover for future operations. "The Baltimore Sun will publish a feature article tomorrow," Chen continued. "Your testimony will anchor the narrative, but we need additional corroboration from other hospital staff who witnessed the communication failures." "Other staff?" Ava asked, recognizing the expansion of conspiracy beyond her individual involvement. "Dr. Pellegrini has agreed to provide supporting testimony about the pressures of treating high-profile patients. Dr. Kim will discuss how residency programs inadequately prepare young physicians for complex cases. Even Natalie Parisi has been approached about commenting on nursing staff observations that weren't properly communicated to attending physicians." The scope of manipulation was breathtaking. Chen had identified every person involved in exposing the conspiracy and was systematically converting them into unwitting supporters of the cover story. Each person would tell partial truths that, combined, would create a narrative serving the conspirators' interests. "What about Mr. Sorrentino himself?" Ava asked. "If he recovers fully, won't he contradict the medical negligence narrative?" Chen's expression shifted subtly, revealing calculation that sent ice through Ava's veins. "Mr. Sorrentino's recovery has been complicated. While the initial poisoning has been addressed, there have been subsequent medical events that may affect his cognitive function and memory formation. It's entirely possible he won't remember many details from this period." Ava understood immediately. They were still poisoning Dominic, using different compounds that would cause brain damage rather than death, ensuring that the primary witness to the conspiracy would be discredited as mentally impaired. "That seems convenient," Ava said carefully. "Medical complications during serious poisoning cases are unfortunately common," Chen replied with practiced sympathy. "The important thing is that he survives, even if certain capabilities are permanently affected." Her phone buzzed with a text message that she glanced at briefly before her expression hardened. "There's been a development. Anthony Bellocchio was found dead an hour ago. Apparent suicide. Left behind documents confessing to systematic embezzlement and expressing guilt over failing to properly manage Mr. Sorrentino's care during his illness." Ava felt the room temperature drop as the implications crystallized. Anthony hadn't been a partner in the conspiracy. He had been another tool, used and discarded when his usefulness ended. His death provided perfect closure for the media narrative while eliminating the primary witness who could expose the larger operation. "Suicide?" Ava managed. "Quite tragic. The pressures of managing complex business relationships during a medical crisis apparently overwhelmed him. His confession documents will be very helpful in explaining the administrative failures that contributed to delayed diagnosis." Chen was watching Ava's reaction carefully, measuring her response to see if she understood the message being conveyed. Anthony's death demonstrated that cooperation was rewarded only as long as it remained useful, and that elimination could be disguised as suicide, accident, or medical complication with equal ease. "I want additional guarantees for my sister's safety," Ava said, her voice steady despite the terror building in her chest. "Of course. Family protection is essential for maintaining productive working relationships." Chen consulted her tablet again. "I'm authorized to offer relocation assistance, educational funding for her daughter, and employment opportunities that will ensure long-term financial security." The offers were generous enough to be tempting and comprehensive enough to suggest total control over Ava's family's future. "Accept the conspiracy's terms, and Chloe would live comfortably under their protection. Resist, and both sisters would join Anthony in convenient deaths that would tie up loose ends while serving the media narrative. "When do you need my testimony?" Ava asked. "The Baltimore Sun interview is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Television appearances will follow throughout the week. Congressional hearings about hospital oversight are being expedited, and your testimony will be crucial for establishing the legislative framework we need." Legislative framework. They weren't just covering up murders. They were using the scandal to reshape healthcare regulations in ways that would benefit their corporate sponsors. Every death, every conspiracy, every cover-up was building towards systematic changes that would consolidate power and eliminate oversight. "Dr. Chen," Ava said finally, "what happens to people who change their minds about cooperating?" Chen's smile became genuinely warm for the first time during their conversation. "My dear, that's not really an option anymore. Once you become part of something this important, leaving isn't a matter of personal choice. It becomes a question of whether you remain useful alive or whether you serve our interests better as another tragic victim of the institutional failures we're exposing." The meeting ended with handshakes and professional courtesy, but Ava understood she was walking out as either a protected asset or a marked target, with no middle ground remaining. The Baltimore Sun newsroom buzzed with the controlled chaos of breaking news as Ava D'Amico walked through glass doors that separated her old life from whatever came next. But she wasn't walking in as the frightened cleaning woman Dr. Chen expected. She was entering as Dr. Ava D'Amico, newly reinstated medical student whose testimony would reshape not just one scandal, but an entire system of corruption. The transformation had taken 18 hours of coordinated precision. While Chen believed Ava was preparing to deliver testimony supporting the medical negligence narrative, Dominic's resources had been working through channels that bypassed conventional legal processes. A single phone call to the dean of Johns Hopkins Medical School, backed by documentation of Ava's academic record and a substantial donation to fund investigative scholarships, had accomplished what years of applications couldn't. "Miss D'Amico," said Sarah Martinez, the investigative reporter whose byline would anchor the story. "Thank you for agreeing to go on record. I understand you have important information about systematic failures in hospital protocols." Ava took the offered seat in the conference room, but when she spoke, her words carried authority that made the reporter lean forward with sudden attention. "I'm here to discuss systematic failures, but not the kind you were told to expect. I'm here to expose the use of Johns Hopkins Hospital as an assassination platform for corporate interests, coordinated through medical manipulation and administrative corruption that has resulted in at least 4 confirmed murders over the past 6 months." The recording equipment captured every word as Ava systematically dismantled the conspiracy's carefully constructed narrative. She presented Dr. Kim's medical documentation, Frank's surveillance evidence, her own recordings of conversations with Chen and Anthony, and most damaging of all, financial records showing payments from Meridian Holdings to hospital administrators, physicians, and media contacts. "Doctor, Margaret Chen isn't retiring next month. She's fleeing the country with approximately $4 million in offshore accounts funded by Meridian Holdings. Anthony Bellocchio didn't commit suicide. He was murdered when his usefulness as a scapegoat became more valuable than his operational knowledge. And the supposed medical negligence that delayed Mr. Sorrentino's diagnosis was actually deliberate poisoning, designed to eliminate someone whose business interests conflicted with Meridian's real estate acquisitions." Sarah Martinez's expression shifted from professional interest to predatory excitement as she realized the scope of the story unfolding before her. This wasn't just healthcare scandal. It was corporate assassination, government corruption, and medical conspiracy operating at levels that would dominate news cycles for months. "You're accusing a major corporation of using a prestigious hospital to commit serial murder," Martinez said. "Those are extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence." Ava smiled with confidence forged through crisis and tempered by expertise that no one could question anymore. "I have that evidence, all of it. documented, verified, and corroborated by multiple independent sources, including federal investigators who have been building a case against Meridian Holdings for securities fraud related to their acquisition methods. The federal investigation had been Dominic's final chess move. His business relationships extended far beyond Baltimore, and his contacts in financial regulatory agencies had been quietly building cases against corporate assassination networks for years. Ava's evidence provided the medical component that connected financial crimes to actual murders, transforming white-collar prosecutions into capital cases. Dr. Chen is currently in custody, Ava continued, along with 6 Meridian Holdings executives who believed they could use medical facilities to eliminate business obstacles without legal consequences. The Baltimore Sun has been offered exclusive access to all evidence, complete federal cooperation, and interviews with every surviving witness, in exchange for accurate reporting that exposes systematic healthcare corruption rather than perpetuating cover stories designed to protect murderers. Martinez was already signaling her editor, understanding that they were sitting on the story of the year. But Ava had one more revelation that would ensure lasting change rather than temporary scandal. There's a broader pattern here that extends far beyond Baltimore. Meridian Holdings has been operating in hospital systems across 12 states, using identical methods to eliminate obstacles to corporate acquisitions. The federal investigation has identified 43 suspicious deaths in healthcare facilities connected to companies that subsequently benefited from Meridian contracts or partnerships. The room fell silent as the implications settled. This wasn't an isolated conspiracy. It was systematic use of American healthcare infrastructure to conduct corporate warfare through medical assassination. "What's your role in exposing this?" Martinez asked. "How does a hospital cleaning worker become the key witness in federal prosecutions?" Ava's smile carried decades of invisible observation, years of dismissed expertise, and months of dangerous investigation that had nearly cost her life. "I was never just a cleaning worker. I was a medical student whose education was interrupted by family tragedy, who continued studying toxicology independently while working to support my sister and her daughter. I maintained clinical knowledge while developing pattern recognition skills that come from seeing things others ignore." She stood, her movement carrying authority that filled the conference room. "But more importantly, I learned that being invisible doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes the people no one sees are the ones best positioned to observe what everyone else misses." The story published 6 hours later across digital and print platforms, with federal raids occurring simultaneously at Meridian Holdings offices in 12 states. Dr. Chen was arrested at Baltimore-Washington International Airport with forged documents and evidence of additional planned assassinations. The corporate assassination network collapsed within 48 hours, destroyed by evidence gathered by someone they had dismissed as irrelevant. 3 months later, Dr. Ava D'Amico addressed the graduating class of Johns Hopkins Medical School as valedictorian, her speech focusing on the responsibility of medical professionals to protect patients from all threats, including those that come from within healthcare institutions themselves. Chloe D'Amico sat in the audience with her daughter, watching her sister receive recognition that had been delayed but never lost. Dominic Sorrentino, fully recovered and cleared of all criminal connections to the Meridian conspiracy, had established a foundation funding medical education for students whose families had been affected by healthcare corruption. "Talent doesn't wear a badge," Ava concluded her speech, looking out over faces that would shape the future of medicine. "Observation doesn't require credentials, and sometimes the most important diagnoses come from people everyone else has trained themselves not to see." The invisible woman had become impossible to ignore, transformed not through revenge or ambition, but through the recognition that knowledge, carefully applied, could protect the vulnerable from those who wielded power without accountability. In the end, she had learned that the most dangerous thing about being invisible wasn't what others might do to you, it was what you might decide